Hello, Mario here. Today we're going to do just a simple introduction to Toonboom Harmony. If you've never used the program before, this will be a good place to start. If you have used it before, a little bit of this will be repetition, but there'll be some good points in here and some good direction for how to properly use the software. It is made by Toonboom. We're in version 20, and every version has been a great improvement from the previous versions. The drawing tools are better. For vector software, it's actually pretty good. As well as the rigging and the texture tools are getting better. It is still vector software, so it is different, and I'll draw some attention to that. So today we're going to talk about the interface, just a basic introduction to the interface, the tools and properties, and I'm going to give you some tips along the way. If you're looking at the interface, it's quite involved. Whenever I'm learning a new application, a lot of times I'll turn around and I'll look at it and think, wow, there's buttons everywhere. Actually, I'm just looking at a green screen. But there's buttons everywhere. It's very overwhelming. So not only do I not understand what the buttons are, what the buttons do, or how to control those buttons, when I'm teaching it, I break it down by sections. So for this particular lesson, we're just covering the drawing tools. So you have your pencil tool and you have your paintbrush tool. And we're just going to talk about those. We're not even going to talk about color. Color will be in the next video. The tips I'm going to give you today are about project location. It's where the files are stored. The Animate button, which is an odd button. It has an odd preset, and if you don't use it correctly, could have some really weird side effects. And just talk briefly about layer objects, or layers, and how we use them. So let's get started. Now the first tip does have to do with where your files are located. And when you first fire up Harmony, it brings you to this screen. The second option is the location of the files. Now, too often I've dealt with students or people that are working on projects but can't find files. Or, there's files here, there's files over here, and they export it over here, and they don't keep track of where their files are stored. And what ends up happening is when they go to composite, which is much, much further down the pipeline, they can't find the files, right? Or they move to another machine or move to another person, and they're having trouble doing editing or doing compositing because they don't know where the files are. All the files aren't together. So this second option, where files are stored, right there, is really important. Same with the top option, the name of this program, or the name of this project. So something that seems pretty trivial, when you're dealing in a film with, 30, 40, 50 scenes with, 25 gigs to 100 gigs, and you have to find one scene, one file, and you don't know where it is, it's really time consuming. So naming your project and knowing where that project is stored is actually quite important when working on a film. So definitely name your project and know where your project is stored. So when I'm getting started with a project, first thing I do is I name it. So I either keep the word new scene, or I replace that and put scene 28. Right? Or maybe in your case, you're going to call it assignment 1. Okay? But definitely name it. Never leave it just new scene or untitled. It's going to haunt you later. And I've seen that many times. Then I'm going to put it in a specific location. I'm going to hit the Browse button, which will bring up my Explorer. I usually go to the desktop, and in this case, I'm going to 2020. You might have a folder on your desktop called Assignments or Film. Okay, so you can hit New Folder and then name it 2020 like I did, or you can name it Assignment 1. So I have 2020, and inside there I have Assignment 1. That's how I would do it in this case. If it was a film, instead of 2020, it would be My Cool Film, or whatever it's called. Okay, so once the program is loaded, the first thing I do is turn off the Animate button. And this brings us to our second tip. Turn off the Animate button. That's what the button looks like, and you can see in the toolbar where it is, at the very far end over there. But this is a button that will cause you some grief if you don't turn it off. What the Animate button is to move objects. If you're drawing frame-by-frame animation, then this button should be turned off. If you draw an item and have the software move it, Flash is known as tween. In Flash, it's known as tween. If you let it tween inside the software, or if it's motion graphics, then we turn the animation button on. But since we're doing frame-by-frame animation, drawn animation, we actually want that button off. Otherwise, there'll be stuff kind of moving around in the background when it shouldn't be. And you won't see that happen until much later. So sometimes you get bitten by this later. So as soon as I fire up Toonboom Harmony, I actually turn that animation button off. So now let's cover the tools and properties. We're going to cover the pencil tool, the paintbrush tool, the select tool, and the properties. Now that I have the software open and my animation button is turned off, we can talk about some of our other tools. We have the paintbrush tool and the pencil tool. Now, any tool that you select has properties listed up here. Okay, so whenever I select the pencil tool, you see the pencil properties. If I select the paintbrush tool, then you see the paintbrush properties. And that's true for any of the tools. So even the select tool, in the tools property, you have that tool's properties. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the paintbrush and the pencil tool properties. Now it is a little different than what you might be used to. As I mentioned before, this is vector software. If you've never drawn in a vector software, it's a little different. And to Toonboom's credit, every version has been better than the previous. They've definitely made advancements in this more than anyone, in my opinion. So let's step back and think. When you're drawing pencil on paper, it's organic. You know the line that you're putting down. It's your line. When you go to Photoshop and use a tablet, there's a learning curve with the tablet. You've all gone through it, most of you. If not, you will go through it. No big deal. You'll get used to a tablet, and you'll get used to Photoshop. But Photoshop, digital-wise, is very true to your line. It's a bitmap line. It's true to your line. But it's still not as true as your paper and pencil. That's still most people's comfort zone. So you have paper and pencil, you have Photoshop and a tablet, which is a bit of a step adjustment, a bit of an adjustment. But then you go from a tablet and vector software, where the software recreates your line mathematically. And there's advantages to that. But again, there's an adjustment there. Toonboom has made advancements, so it's a lot better than what it was. But we can control how that mathematical equation works out your line. See, it's not your true line. Once you lay your line down, it's actually going to mathematically recreate that line. Okay, and that's called vectorization. And we can actually control how the vectorization works in Toonboom Harmony. So looking at our pencil tool and our tool properties, we see smoothing as one of the options. And what that is the vectorization of the line. So when you put your line down and it recalculates it, the smoothing controls how much vectorization is involved. So 0 will be as close to your real line as possible. 5 is the default, okay, which has a bit of modifications to your line. It's actually not too bad. If you go higher to a 10 or a 20, it starts to be a very stylistic line, where you'll put your line down, lift your stylus, and the line will actually adjust and recalculate. Basically, it's optimizing your line. Okay? So the smoothing will determine how true it is to your line and how much stylization is there. So we have the pencil tool, and in the properties, the default is 5. If you want it to be true to your line, you're going to turn this right down to 0, and that's as true to your line as Harmony can be. So when you do grab your stylus and you lay a line down, 0 is pretty close to your true line. Now if you notice, I'm just doing squigglies. Watch when I lift the pencil, you might see the line adjust. And I'm going to lift the line. See, when I lift the stylus, there's very little adjustment when the smoothing is set to 0. Okay, but let's say I crank this back up. Okay, right now it's at 33 there. And I'm going to just scribble in the line again. And I'm going to lift up my pen. You see it adjust? Watch that again. Watch when I lift my pen, how the line adjusts. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so it's actually controlling the smoothing of the line or the vectorization of the line. So now that we got a bunch of scribblies up there, it's a good time to talk about the select tool, which is at the very top, the first arrow. Okay, the contour tool we'll talk about another day. We're just talking about the top arrow, the top select tool. Okay. Now, the select tool is similar to any tool that you want, you select it. Now, in Photoshop, if I wanted to select one of these lines, I have to kind of go all the way around and spend like all day going, crap, I got a line in there. Let's start this again. All the way around, and I'm going to try and get around the whole way. Oh god, this is taking me forever. So, Toonboom has a kind of a cooler way and easier way to select lines. You just go through it. Okay? You just draw a line with the select tool. If you want 2 lines, you draw a line through 2 lines, and you get both. So it's a lot easier than what we're used to with the drawing the line. You get it. So if I want to delete all these lines, I just draw a line right through, hit delete, and we're done. So now, let's talk about our paintbrush tool. So just like the pencil tool, when you select it, you have the tool properties. So the tool properties change just like it did with the pencil tool. So that's our pencil tool and the pencil properties, paintbrush tool, and the paintbrush properties. Now, there isn't a smoothing in this option, but there is a maximum size. So what the maximum size is it's your pressure sensitivity. The harder you push, the wider the line. Pretty straightforward. Now, if you turn it up, when you push, the line will be even wider. So when you push hard, the line will be wide to a maximum. And this is what we're setting. How wide will it push at maximum pressure? It also has different brushes here. Okay, so there are textured brushes in Toonboom. They're not as good as Photoshop, and that's because Photoshop is a bitmap program, where Harmony is a vector program. So sometimes you may see a repetition in the textured line. Now, to be honest, most people don't realize. So it's not a big deal. It's nice to know that there are some different brushes that you can use. But they may take some getting used to. They may not be as nice as some of the ones you have in Photoshop. But it's nice that they're there. So this brings us to our third tip. For this video, we're really just talking about sketching tools, pencil, paintbrush. Get used to these tools. Try these tools. Don't waste your time with color yet. Just get used to drawing with these tools. Get used to the pencil tool. Get used to the brush tool. Use it for clean lines. Use it for rough lines. Just try some sketches. Make it loose. Find your drawing. Then add another layer and clean it up. And just get used to these tools to see how they work for you. When is a good rough line, or what are the settings for a good rough line? What are a good setting for a clean line? There's a lot of different opinions here. A lot of people just end up finding what works for them. Okay, I know on Toonboom's website, originally they said use the paintbrush tool for rough sketches and just keep the maximum pressure down low. It doesn't necessarily have to be 0. But you want it really low. And then just sketch it in and then add another layer, turn up your thickness or your maximum thickness, and then start cleaning up. So they suggested with the paintbrush tool, but I've seen people do rough animation with pencil tool and clean it up with a pencil tool, or rough with a pencil tool and clean up with a paintbrush. So this is up to you. At this stage, you really just got to get used to those tools, try them out. And for this video, that's what we're going to recommend. So we have been already talking about layers. A rough layer, a clean layer. So let's take a look at where those layers are. You can see down here at the bottom, I have a picture of a screen capture of the software itself. And you can see that the layers are listed down here. Right now we only have a drawing layer. Okay. Now you can add other drawing layers. There are multiple types of layers, which you're seeing over here in this window. Okay, there's all types of different layers. Today we are just working with drawing layers. So if you're going to add another layer, you're going to hit the plus key here and then select drawing. So let's do that inside the software. So down here, I'm going to click on the plus key, and it's going to give me all these options. We're going to select drawing. Okay, and it's going to give us the opportunity to name it. Never just leave it drawing. Okay, so you can name this rough or clean. Okay, so in our case, let's do a rough layer. And stick to vector. Okay, we want to get used to vector software. Okay, so this is your time to get used to it. Eventually, you may choose to go back to bitmap, But there's a lot of animation that won't use this. Especially if you get into rigged animation, it has to be vector. There's no choice. Okay? So get used to vector. For this particular task today, I would recommend just keeping these at vector. Add it. You'll see that it shows up here at the bottom, rough. You may choose to add another one, clean. Add it. Again, keep it vector. So now you have a clean layer and a rough layer. And you can close this. And now you can select which layer you want to draw on. So if you're used to Photoshop and you're comfortable drawing in Photoshop, you are drawing in bitmap layers. I know I'm asking you to try this in vector layers, and the reason for that is if you are really good at drawing houses, but not characters, why would you continue always drawing houses, always drawing houses, always drawing houses? You have to expand yourself into props, into characters. You want to be more versatile than just a person who can draw houses. You want to be more versatile an artist than to only draw in bitmap. You want to be comfortable enough to draw in vector as well, because you never know when a studio is going to say, we need props in vector, which is very common. We need characters in vector, which is extremely common, and we will actually cover that. So, for your trials today, when you're trying out the software, stick with vector layers and try out those layers. Now I'm going to give you another tip as well. When you're drawing, draw whole objects. A lot of people see this rectangle and try to squeeze everything into that rectangle. And if they're drawing a tree and it happens to go further than the rectangle, they don't draw it. Don't pass the rectangle. If you have a rock that's going to go outside of this rectangle, complete it. Draw the whole rock, even if it is outside of this rectangle. Okay? So going back to that tip, draw whole objects. Don't just draw half rocks. You didn't see that. Don't just draw half rocks. Don't draw half of a tree. Unless, of course, the tree is enormous. Yeah, if you're going to have a branch creep into the shot, draw a little bit outside of this rectangle, but don't cut it right at the rectangle. Too many times I'm working on a shot and the camera moves and you see half a tree or half a rock. Okay? Give a little bit of extra artwork for the compositor to work with. Okay? So try to stick with that tip. Try to draw whole objects. Draw outside of that rectangle. Don't be confined to that rectangle. So let's do a quick recap of the tips. Know where your files are located. Name your project. Turn off the Animate button. Get used to vector drawing. And draw whole objects. Hopefully this video helps you guys. Have fun. So let's talk about why are my pants see-through? To the interface, the tools and properties, and I'm going to give you some tips along the way. Now, So let's recap on the tips. What a bad time to find out that I don't have my
top lights on.
Shh.